For over 10 years, One America News has been a beacon of truth in journalism. And for just as many years, we've been enemy number one for the deep state. Communists in Washington and the mainstream media have decided it's much safer to attack, deplatform, demonetize, and censor us than it is to maintain the freedom of the press. But ask yourself, do you really think they'd go to all the trouble of censoring us if we were lying? If our reporting was actually fake news? No, they're censoring us because we're right. And people who tell the truth are dangerous. Which is why One America News is the only national news network you can turn to for the stories the mainstream media won't touch. So let's take a moment and go over some of these stories and imagine what our country, what world history could be like today if OAN wasn't censored and we had the same coverage as the corrupt legacy networks. A great place to start would be with President Trump and the multiple assassination attempts on his life. For years, we've covered the absolutely toxic attacks against Trump from Democrats and the media, and we've warned it could only lead to violence.
They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump, and that's a fact.
In fact, just before the despicable shooter took aim at our commander-in-chief, I did a report exposing the Democrats and the media who were getting away with literally calling for President Trump to be assassinated. See the headlines for yourself. This is what passes for the mainstream in America. So, the legacy news calls for Trump to be murdered, and what do you know?
Take a look at what happened.
A few days after my report, a hateful Democrat brainwashed by Biden's putrid propaganda tried to take the life of our president and nearly succeeded. And when that failed, they did it again. Another psychotic Democrat tried to kill our president, hiding out at his golf course and waiting in the bushes to ambush Trump. This was a man who donated to Democrats 19 times and who, after failing to kill the president, offered $150,000 to whoever could complete the job, which Biden's DOJ bizarrely broadcast and shared with the media as if they hoped someone would actually take up the offer. These are the people supporting the Democrat Party. This is their base. They created them. They pander to them. They encourage them because none of this matters to them. They don't care. The mainstream media even jokes about it. They actually thought crazed Democrats literally trying to take Trump's life was funny.
We love my rallies, except when someone does bing bang, bing, 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 right at me.
That's how sick and demented these people really are. Now, instead of watching these psychos laughing about shooting the president, instead of watching the mainstream media, which was openly encouraging people to murder President Trump, you could have been watching One America News, where we tried to warn America about the Democrats' deadly agenda.
And he must be stopped. He cannot be president.
But that's just the tip of the iceberg and follows years of Democrats pushing theory after bogus conspiracy theory about Trump in a shameful effort to brainwash the American people and prevent him from ever taking office again. These attacks on Donald Trump has so far given us 2 failed impeachments and at least 4 phony indictments, multiple lawsuits in New York and Georgia, multiple assassination attempts, and all for saying what 90% of Americans know for a fact, that the 2020 election was stolen and allowed a fake president to take over the White House.
We were robbed of an election.
Using the word rigged, using the word steal, do you think it's dangerous going into 2020?
I don't, because we can actually back it up. It was not a free and fair election.
But this coup shouldn't be a surprise, and that's exactly what this is, an American coup, because the Democrats and the deep state have been scheming against President Trump before he was ever even elected. If you need an example, how about the phony Russian collusion hoax, the major story of the century that got pushed by all the legacy networks, and which OAN exposed as a totally fabricated lie? But the Russian collusion story wasn't just a lie. It was far worse because it was created by Trump's political opponent and was spread and propagated by the mainstream media who fed their lies to the American people for the sole purpose of undermining Trump's campaign. According to John Durham's investigation, Hillary Clinton's team paid operatives to infiltrate Trump Tower and Trump servers at the White House, which are top secret, just so they could fabricate a story about Trump colluding with Russia. Democrat staffer Seth Rich stumbled across this deception on the DNC servers and mysteriously was shot twice in the back, execution style, just a few days later. The FBI, the CIA, and Special Investigator Robert Mueller knew this witch hunt was fake from the beginning, but they went along with it anyway, wasting millions of our tax dollars. And what's crazy is that none of this is a conspiracy theory. This isn't me sitting here coming up with some wild, sensational story. All of this is documented, factual information that has been proven in the public record. That's election interference. And we tried to stop it. We reported on all of this, on how Hillary Clinton's team helped create the Steele dossier, how her campaign literally spied on President Trump, and how she hired a foreign agent to sabotage her political opponent with the help of the U.S. government. And then magically, she was able to convince the mainstream media that it was actually Trump who had done all of those things, and they bought it. But not One America News. In fact, we interviewed Carter Page back in 2018, blowing the lid off Clinton's conspiracy to frame President Trump. So after the phony Russian collusion story fell apart, the Democrats had to fabricate another story, this time about Ukraine, which, considering Biden's staggering collusion with Ukraine, is just incredible.
Oh, son of a bitch.
Of course, the Ukraine story turned out to be another big lie, even though Adam Schiff swore up and down that he had incontrovertible evidence against President Trump.
Can you agree that there has been no evidence of collusion, coordination, or conspiracy that has been presented thus far between the Trump campaign and Russia?
No, I don't agree with that at all. I think there's plenty of evidence of collusion or conspiracy in plain sight.
Except Schiff never showed that evidence to anyone. So after years of the charade, not only was not a single scrap of evidence found against Trump, but now Durham's report proves it was a phony campaign designed to politically and now literally assassinate Trump and prevent him from ever taking office. As usual, One America News reported the facts, and the mainstream media covered it up. But you can't cover up the truth forever. On July 1st, 2024, the Supreme Court came out and proved us right again, overturning the Democrats' lies and ruling that President Trump has total immunity from official acts taken while in office. This destroys the Democrats' narrative that Trump obstructed justice, collaborated with foreign powers, and incited an insurrection. We covered the truth on those stories while the mainstream media promoted conspiracies. Again, how different would our nation be today if Americans were made aware of all of President Trump's accomplishments instead of being force-fed treachery and deceit every single day? Well, One America News steps in again. I put together an hour-long special documenting everything President Trump did for our nation and how he literally made America great again. Frankly, an hour was too short, but you get the point. No other national news network out there would ever dedicate airtime to honoring Trump's service to our country, which is probably why we're in the situation we're in today. But we're used to standing alone, and our reporting on President Trump is just the beginning. Because one of the most divisive, controversial stories of our lifetimes has undoubtedly become the use of the dreaded COVID vaccines. Now, from the very start, I reported that there were a lot of questions about the efficacy of these vaccines, specifically after speaking with multiple doctors who warned about some of the side effects they were seeing firsthand in their patients. Side effects that were undeniable, unless you're a Democrat or in the mainstream media. This wasn't conspiracy. It was real-world evidence presented by doctors. Incredibly, at that time, you had the leftist radicals screeching, "We have to trust the science."
I trust the scientists.
I trust vaccines. I trust scientists.
The science determines what is the correct answer to a particular question.
I trust the science.
But when actual doctors doing actual science tried to warn everyone saying, "Hang on a minute, this isn't adding up," those same leftists screamed, "No, not that science." So really, just the science that happens to agree with the authoritarians in Washington. Funny how that works. So of course they denounced OAN and called us dangerous science deniers, which is so ironic I'm not going to even bother arguing with them. But in the end, big tech stepped in, and Google and Facebook censored us. YouTube kicked us off their platform, and we were demonetized and deplatformed over my reports that quoted an actual doctor. Flash forward to today, after more than 3 years and millions of senseless deaths from the same toxic vaccines. Who was proven right? On top of countless scientists and frontline doctors warning about the dangers of the experimental vaccines, we now have massive lawsuits against the vaccine makers themselves, including one from the state of Kansas, which is suing Pfizer for misrepresenting their vaccine and the deadly adverse events it causes. Not to mention numerous studies like this one out of Germany that show the vaccine is not only totally ineffective, but that the number of people dying has skyrocketed since they started taking the vaccines. Didn't hear any of that on the mainstream media. And now the Supreme Court of New York has officially confirmed what we reported the whole time, that being vaccinated does not prevent an individual from contracting or transmitting COVID-19. Imagine that, exactly what we reported, that the vaccine does not prevent infection and doesn't stop you from spreading the virus. The New York Supreme Court sounds an awful lot like a conspiracy theorist. I wonder if YouTube and Google are going to censor the Supreme Court justices for spreading this misinformation. Incredibly, the court actually ordered that all New York City employees who were fired for not taking the Fauci injection have to be reinstated with full back pay for all their lost wages. That means 1,700 employees, many of whom were police or firefighters, are finally seeing justice. Although the damage done to their jobs and livelihoods has already been done. And again, all of this is what we reported from the start. But we won't hold our breath for an apology from YouTube. We made countless reports about the unexplained deaths, the heart attacks, infertility, miscarriages, neurological disorders, the blood clots, the thousands of healthy young athletes collapsing on the field and dying for unknown reasons or sudden death syndrome. Imagine how many lives could have been saved if only more people had watched One American News. But they couldn't, because we were censored by the government. Chris Krebs, the director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency and one of Trump's own appointees, actually hated President Trump and was actively working to silence conservatives online, including us here at One American News. Listen for a second to this exchange between Krebs and Alex Stamos, the head of the Election Integrity Partnership, a group with Soros ties that's targeting One American News, as they discuss getting rid of OAN.
Then we're going to have to figure out the OANN and Newsmax problem. You know, that these companies have freedom of speech, but I'm not sure we need Verizon, AT&T, Comcast, and such to be bringing them into tens of millions of homes.
Did you catch that? We are going to have to figure out the OAN problem. They are literally talking about censoring our freedom of speech, acting like because we're allowed to air our reports, protected by our First Amendment rights, that we're dangerous extremists who need to be silenced for the good of the country. Someone must have been listening, because around the same time, actual members of our government, Democrat Representatives Anna Eshoo and Jerry McNerney, sent a mafia-style letter to AT&T trying to strong-arm the cable provider into dropping One America News from their network. The government stooges falsely claimed that One America News has published misinformation and incendiary reports, and they demanded that OAN be shut down for public safety. And what do you know? A year later, that's exactly what AT&T did, dropping OAN from its lineup. 6 months later, Verizon followed suit and dropped us as well, and we've been blacklisted by the cable channels ever since. All because we reported the truth. Specifically, about the dreaded China virus. The U.S. government can't have people knowing they were responsible for unleashing this catastrophe upon the world. And using pressure from the FBI, they got the big tech giants to go along with them. After airing one of my reports on the China virus, where I interviewed an actual doctor who called hydroxychloroquine a cure for the virus, YouTube gave us a strike and demonetized our channel for spreading dangerous misinformation. Never mind that the information came directly from a doctor or that it's been repeatedly proven true. We were censored and silenced by the U.S. government. Now, if you had been able to watch One America News, you would have learned about the safe, proven treatments that have saved hundreds of thousands of lives, like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, medications the media claimed were for deworming horses, warning they will kill you.
It will kill you. I cannot stress enough. This will kill you.
Well, it won't kill you. That's a lie. And we were the only ones sharing this life-saving information, which is backed up by countless studies proving One America News was right all along. But that's not all, because while we were trying to save lives with ivermectin, former head of the CDC, Anthony Mengele Fauci, was not only calling for lockdowns and masks and social distancing based on nothing at all, but he was also pushing the deadly and toxic vaccines. To watch the mainstream media, you'd think he was the savior of science, Saint Fauci, a man who can do no wrong. The only problem is that he's actually a soulless psychopath who tortures dogs, carries out horrific experiments on black orphans, lies to Congress, promotes conspiracies, and denies the origins of COVID while trying to cover up his part in the lab leak that allowed the virus to escape in the first place. This man should be behind bars, or worse, for life. And while we covered his crimes against humanity, the mainstream media tried to cover them up. If America had been made aware of his crimes, just think of the pain and suffering we could have avoided. But our reporting on Fauci was denounced, just like the lab leak theory, which we exposed and reported on years before anyone else. OAN reported that this virus was genetically engineered in a Chinese lab funded by U.S. tax dollars, overseen by Anthony Fauci, and we were ridiculed for our reports. Today, that story is a little different because all of our reporting has been proven true.
I think there's no doubt that NIH was funding gain-of-function research.
Is it likely that American tax dollars funded the gain-of-function research that created this virus?
I think it did, not only from NIH, but from the State Department, USAID, and from DOD.
So now we've covered Trump's assassination attempts, vaccines, the China virus, and Anthony Fauci. What other lies did the media try to promote, only to be exposed by our reporting? Well, back in 2018, the world was rocked by news out of Syria that President Bashar al-Assad carried out a despicable attack against his own citizens using deadly chemical weapons to wipe out rebel fighters. The mainstream media covered the news in breathless horror, demanding swift and decisive action from the United States. The problem was that story wasn't true. None of it ever happened. You see, One America News actually went to Syria to investigate and uncover the truth. I personally visited Ground Zero. I talked to the citizens, to the people living there. I went to the hospital and talked to the doctors and nurses. There was never any chemical attack. The story was totally made up by terrorists that were funded by the CIA to help overthrow the legitimate, democratically elected government of Syria. The deep state and Washington's warmongers once again pushing for illegal regime change using terrorists and their puppets in the mainstream media to promote their lies. Well, OAN was there, and we proved them wrong. And in the years since then, the truth has come out about the staged chemical attacks and the terrorist group known as the White Helmets. But again, these stories were covered up by the mainstream media, and OAN was the only place you could find that truth. Today, that kind of truthful reporting is more important than ever. And if we hadn't been censored into oblivion, maybe we could have avoided the destruction brought upon our country over the last 4 years, especially when it comes to uncovering the Bidens, the modern American crime family. Where do we even begin? How about a story that we were again blasted for, but which again ended up being completely true? Hunter Biden's laptop. Now, the consequences of the cover-up and deception by the mainstream media cannot be overstated. Hunter's disgusting criminal activity was exposed to the world in a series of laptops that he carelessly forgot about. And the crimes revealed on his hard drives could have changed the outcome of the 2020 election. Many of the things that Biden was actually photographed doing, depraved sexual acts with hookers and what appear to be children, as well as his obvious illegal drug use, were not only revolting, but clearly illegal. If this information and these horrifying images had been made public before the 2020 election, there is no way Joe Biden would have lasted long enough to steal the election and be installed in the White House. But when the images were released, the mainstream media came up with a phony story that they were somehow Russian disinformation. But they weren't. They're all completely real. And all the so-called intelligence experts in various agencies like the FBI who were trotted out to lie on camera about the validity of the hard drives have all since backtracked and admitted that yes, the laptops and the information they contain are completely legitimate. And we reported that. From day one, we exposed the hard drives instead of suppressing the information in what is nothing less than the government overthrowing an election. But OAN was slammed for our reporting and denounced as conspiracy theorists. How different the world could be today if only the American public had known about the pervert they were supporting. Not that he was actually elected anyway, but Biden would have been a lot harder to sell if Americans knew how big a criminal the deep state was propping up. Speaking of which, since the bellicose bag of bones finally shambled his way out of election, I think we deserve some credit for pointing out from day one that he was never fit for office to begin with. We were called right-wing wackos for claiming that he was mentally incompetent. That is, until all the bloviating Biden bots saw his last debate and realized, hey, maybe we were right. And of course, we can't forget about one of the biggest lies of all, the fake insurrection on January 6th. On that very day, OAN was front and center reporting that this was never a violent overthrow of the government. It was a peaceful gathering of protesters who were sick and tired of being lied to by the government. Well, despite our best efforts, we all got lied to again. And then right before our eyes, the lie became the reality. And yet, contradicting all the Democrats' claims, no one was killed by protesters that day. Sadly, however, at least one protester, and maybe more, were killed by police. There are still serious questions about Rosanne Boyland, a protester who died on January 6th, who was trampled in the crowd and then savagely beaten by officers as she lay helpless on the ground. Police officer Lila Morris was filmed viciously brutalizing the unconscious body of Rosanne Boyland before she died. The Morris has yet to face criminal charges for her actions. And we can't forget about Officer Michael Byrd, DC's finest, who shot and killed an unarmed protester, Ashley Babbitt. Not only has he never faced any charges, since then, he's actually been promoted. And then, of course, there's Officer Brian Sicknick, who was killed by a raging Trump protester bashing a fire extinguisher into his head.
Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the hours-long attack.
They beat a Capitol police officer to death with a fire extinguisher.
Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher during the fight.
He died at the age of 42 after he was bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher.
Yeah, that was all fake news. Brian Sicknick died of natural causes. Officer Sicknick's death is still a tragedy. There's no doubt about it. But the only reason people ever believed he was killed by Trump supporters in the first place is because the mainstream media lied about it. But OAN never did. We reported the truth. And as usual, we got blasted by the mainstream media. These are just a few of the innumerable examples where One America News reported the truth, was demonized by Washington and the legacy news networks, and then later totally vindicated by the facts. Time and again, extremist, militant, left-wing news rags like Daily Beast, Media Matters, CNN, New York Times, and all the rest have attacked One America News for our reporting. They've published blatantly false headlines, lying about us, lying about our reporting, and lying about the news. And they're held up and promoted by the left as champions of the truth, while we get censored. And when the facts eventually come out, as they always do, and OAN is proven right, there's never an apology or an admission that they were wrong. No, that's part of the narrative. They wouldn't dare admit they were lying. Because for the left, it's not about reporting the news. It's about spreading the message. Are you starting to get the picture why the radical left is so desperate to censor OAN? These are stories which never would have been brought to light were it not for OAN's dedication to reporting the truth. If the American people knew what really happened, if they knew these stories and could decide for themselves, we'd still be on the air, Trump would have remained in office, and the last 4 years would have looked very different. This is why One America News is so crucial and what sets us apart from all the other news networks on air today. If you want to save our nation, now is the time, because this is information warfare. And the only way to win is to make sure as many people are armed with the truth as possible. Call your cable provider, call AT&T, call Cox, call Comcast and Dish and DirecTV and let them know what's happening. Demand that they carry OAN. And there might still be a chance we can turn this country around together. Although it may not be popular, the truth rarely is. We have never backed down or shied away from reporting the facts, even if we had to do it alone. For One America News, I'm Pearson Sharp.
For all our viewers asking where One America News is heading in the future, we would like to introduce you to OAN Live. OAN Live is the best way to stay up to date on all of the hard-hitting, straight-shooting, national and international headlines. And the best part is, OAN Live is only $4.99 per month. All the credible, honest, unbiased reporting One America News offers at a fraction of the cost of cable. Just go to OANN.com to easily sign up for OAN Live and stay informed.